Welcome to this webinar 3CO03, a support webinar for centres and students. The webinar is one of a series of recorded webinars for each of the units within the Foundation Certificate in People Practice. So the webinar is aimed at those who are working towards this CIPD Foundation qualification or those who are supporting those working towards the qualification. The full title of the unit is 3CO03 Core Behaviours for People Professionals, and it is the third core unit in the Foundation Certificate. So let's just take a moment to remind ourselves of what this unit is about. Unit 3CO03 actually focuses on the essential, general, required behaviours we would expect from a people professional working at this level. Specifically, it looks at aspects of behaviour such as ethical principles and how these affect the way we behave, our professional values and how these affect our practice at work, our professional development and how we approach our CPD. The learner assessment briefs are written specifically to enable learners to meet all the requirements of the relevant unit, in this case 3CO03. As the assessments are revised on a regular basis, it should be noted that this webinar relates particularly to the assessment brief that you can see here. The image on the slide there is a copy of the front page of the assessment brief we're talking about here. So just to be clear, you should check that any brief you're working with has the assessment ID 3CO03-2501. That means that it's the first assessment brief of this qualification year, 2025. Just to further confirm that, you can see the 3 bullet points at the bottom of the page there. The first one confirms that this assessment brief was released in June 2025. And the second bullet point also tells you that the brief will expire and be replaced by another one in 2026, June 2026. Finally, and this is particularly important for both centres and learners, the last moderation window for this learner assessment brief will be September 2026. So what's in this assessment brief? What's the overall assessment requirement for you as learners? Well, essentially, this assessment brief is about applying for a people practice role. And to make that application, you're asked to complete 4 written questions, so to respond to 4 questions, and also to provide your CPD record. We're told there that the 4 written questions can take up to 2,000 words, plus or minus 10%. So you've got 2,000 words, you've got approximately 500 words per question. You don't have to do it equally, but you've got 2,000 words to spread across those 4 responses, and also your CPD record, which won't be included in the 2,000 words. So that's the overview of what's required. Let's now go into a little bit more detail. The brief provides us with a scenario. So we know that this application is to be made to an organisation called Nuvascare Limited. And Nuvascare are a provider of home-based care, so they go out into people's homes to provide care to them. And that Nuvascare is seeking an HRL&D assistant to work within their people practice team. We know as well that the role will involve all aspects of people practice initially, but that there is a view to a more specialist role with either the HR team or the L&D team after the first year or so. We also know that Nuvascare are looking for someone who has sound ethical and professional values and who applies these to their work and life. So they want someone who has real values, who knows their values and who applies them. They also want someone who is a good team player, someone who's open, adaptable and enjoys working with others. And they also want someone who loves learning and building skills, who's motivated to take up all the opportunities Novascare can offer. So all those bits of information there have come from the scenario and the assessment brief, and they all give you tips about what to include in your application. So make sure you read the scenario in the assessment brief in full. This slide is a synopsis of it. You will probably find more hints and tips when you read the full scenario. So now that we've got a full understanding of the context, let's just remind ourselves of what we have to do. So we've got to apply for that role, and we've got to do it by responding to 4 questions, questions 1 to 4, which will enable Novascare to learn more about us. And we also have to follow the instruction to provide a record of our CPD. So that's all we have to do, 5 things. And we're going to take each of those 5 things, the 4 questions and the instruction, in turn next. Question 1. Well, Novascare sets a little bit of a scene for us here by telling us that ethical working is very important to them. And therefore, they want to know what you understand by the terms ethical principles and professional values. So that's one part of this question, but there is there is a second part. They also want you to give an example of how any one of your values has informed your behaviour at work. So they don't just want to know that you understand them, they want to know that you do apply them as well. And they want the full context of the example. They want a fully rounded example. So what type of work, what was the context for your example? And what was the value and how did it inform your behaviour? So let's look at how you might respond to question 1. The first part of question 1 is about your understanding of those 2 terms, ethical principles and professional values. It's worth saying, I think, first of all, that you don't need to get too hung up on trying to differentiate these 2 things. Most values, whether we refer to ethical values, personal values, professional values, come from ethical principles. They emanate from essential ethics, really. So you're going to find the same words across the 2 things. There's bound to be a whole lot of crossover there. So don't worry about making them too distinct and different. What's important is that you explain what you understand by them. So there is a slight difference in that ethical principles can be more general, things like honesty, equality, responsibility. They might apply in all aspects of life. Whereas professional values, just the term professional being included there, tells us that these are about work values, really. They are values that will inform how you work or how you think people should work. Might be things like accountability, professionalism, integrity, however or whatever that means to you. So here we're looking for you to explain what you understand by these 2 terms, ethical principles and professional values. And you need to think about that for yourself, look into that, do a bit of research, decide what for you those 2 terms really mean. The second part of question 1 requires you to take one of your values and explain in an example how that value has informed your behaviour at work. So you need to think, first of all, think inwards and a little bit deeply about what are your values? What is important to you in life? What values do you hold? And then take one of those values, explain it. What does it mean to you? Particularly if it's something quite generic like integrity or professionalism, then what does that mean to you? That could mean different things to different people. So name your value and explain it, but then give us a good example of how it has informed your behaviour at work. So there's a couple of examples there, but these are just examples. You should come up with your own. And the examples we've used there are equality and fairness. So if you're choosing that and stating that as a value, your example of it may be to do with ensuring a fair delivery of a service or an allocation of resources. It might be about how you stood up against some unfairness, how you stood up against some kind of prejudice, Maybe you ensured someone wasn't left out of something. However that value appeared, so that's just a real outline value there. You need to put specifics in. What was, if it's anything like that, what was happening, what were you doing, what were you allocating, etc., etc. What prejudice did you stand up against? Whatever it was, however you want to present that example, that's up to you to show an example of how your behaviour was informed by that value. There's a second example there, just to give you a little bit more inspiration. So professionalism, what does that mean to you? And then it might be, your example might be to do with taking responsibility for something, maybe taking responsibility for a mistake or something that went wrong, or for something that went right, for seeing something through to the end, about meeting deadlines, overcoming challenges. Again, whatever it is, you explain, give us a meaningful example of your value and how it informed your behaviour at work. Let's move on to question 2. So Novus Care tell us that as a provider of care, they are rightly rigorous about complying with relevant regulation and law. And because it's important to them, they want to know that it's important to you too. So they want you to tell them about 2 ways you have previously complied with relevant regulation or law in your work or studies within the context of ethics and professional practice. That's a bit wordy, really. That's a lot of words there. But essentially, they're wanting 2 ways that you've complied with regulation or law in your work or studies in the context of ethics and professional practice. Well, the context of ethics and professional practice is very wide. Let's dig down a bit into that in the next slide. So 2 ways, 2 examples we need relating to your compliance with regulation and law. Let's put those together, that you've complied with the law, whether it was in your work or studies, in the context of ethics and professional practice, which we've said is a very, very wide arena. So the obvious one to go for here might be equalities law. People will tend to go for that because it's very much the first thing that comes to mind when we think about ethics and professional practice in our role. So it may be that you have upheld equality in some context. It might be in a recruitment context, a recruitment initiative. It might have been in the way you shared an opportunity with other people, that you made sure someone wasn't excluded from something. So we want an example of how you've complied with law, and you can use equalities law. You can also use health and safety law because that's around ethics as well. It's ethical to ensure the safety of your customers, of your colleagues. So depending on how you explain that, it may well be that health and safety law is an example that's within that context of ethics. Equally, data law, if you've managed sensitive data, maybe you've complied with something, you've avoided a leak, you've handled data in a certain way, that has been about ethics and professional practice. So there's lots of examples. It doesn't just have to be equalities law, although that's the obvious one. And so we actually want you to think about 2 examples. They don't have to be different laws. You could have 2 examples from within the same piece of legislation. That's fine, as long as you give Novus Care 2 examples of how you have complied with law in your work, or if necessary, in your studies. Obviously, the law and regulation is important to a care company, to most companies, and so they want to know that you understand the law and that you can comply with it too. So 2 examples connected to whatever legislation you think is appropriate here. Question 3. For this question, Novus Care say that our people practice team are a happy and inclusive group of people who respect each other and who work well together. The team have their own values, and they are that everyone is willing to contribute their views and opinions, clarify problems or issues, and work effectively as part of the team. So for this question, you're asked to provide 3 examples one for each of those three areas, A, B and C, summarising how you demonstrated each of these behaviours. So we're going to give three examples, one for each of those areas, starting with A, contribute views and opinions. So here you need to think about a time, ideally, well, it would be lovely if it was a people practice workplace, but it could be any workplace, it could be a study context, where you have contributed your views and opinions. And we want a specific example. Maybe you had some knowledge that was worth inputting to a conversation. Maybe it was a particular opinion you had about something that was valuable and relevant. Maybe you were challenging something, challenging in a good way. Maybe someone suggested something, but you didn't think that was a good idea. And so you may have put forward your view about why that wasn't a good thing to do and what could be better. So an example about how you contributed your views and opinions to something. Remember in that example that it might be worth just considering those values that Novascare has stated. Novascare said that their own values included honesty, kindness and openness. So when you're talking about how you contributed your views and opinions, it wouldn't be a bad thing to reflect those values. Did you do it in a way that was honest, kind and open? Don't focus too much on those values. It's not all about that. The most important thing there is the example about how you contributed your views and opinions. Equally, we need an example for B. We need to know how and when and where you clarified problems or issues. So think back to a time when there's been some kind of issue or problem. It doesn't have to be huge, it doesn't have to be a major catastrophic issue. This could be something quite day-to-day, quite something relatively small. But it's a problem. It would have been a problem if you hadn't done something about it, if you hadn't clarified it, if you hadn't addressed it. So think about that. Again, you might, in your example, want to reflect those Novascare values: honesty, kindness, openness, respect. But again, as I said before, the main thrust of this response here is your example. How did you clarify your problems or issues? It's just one, really. As long as you give an example of clarifying one, that's enough. And then we move to C. So we also want an example of how you worked effectively as part of a team. Well, it's almost impossible to get through life without being part of a team in some context. So ideally you will have been in a team at work, that's very likely, or maybe in studies, or whatever context you think is appropriate here. Talk about how you have worked effectively as part of a team. What did you do that made you effective? Was it about including everyone, sharing things, embracing different opinions, different viewpoints? How did you act as a good team player? What did you do that made you a positive member of that team? And remember again that Novascare is looking for someone who's a good team player. And to them, that means someone who is open, adaptable, and enjoys working with others. So you may want to bear those in mind when you're responding to criteria C here. So 3 examples, one for each of those areas, will answer your question 3. Question 4. So Novascare state that professional development is key to the effectiveness of their people practice team, and so they want to know how you approach your professional development. They ask that you tell them about your favourite methods for keeping up to date with issues and developments in the people profession, and how you make use of the information you gain from these 2 methods. So we're looking for your 2 favourite methods for keeping up to date, and in each case, how you make use of the information you gain. So 2 examples now of your 2 favourite methods for keeping up to date with the people profession. Remember, of course, how important Novascare think development is and that learning is so important. And so you're going to demonstrate that you are the kind of person who fits that by talking about your 2 favourite methods for staying up to date. So what might they be? Well, it could be, do you listen to a podcast? Do you access a magazine? Do you subscribe to something? Do you check a website regularly? Do you have emails? How do you do it? Are you members of a group? Are you in a network? Do you talk to colleagues? Whatever it is, you come up with your example, but be specific. It's not enough just to say, I listen to a podcast. If you're talking about a podcast, we want to know what podcast, what's it about, what does it tell you, who hosts it. So we want a full description of your method. And then why is that method important to you? Why is that information useful? How do you use it? So if you access a podcast about a particular thing, why is that relevant for you? How do you use that information? And we want 2 examples of that. So 2 examples. In each example, you've got the method and how you use the information. Question 5 is actually the instruction we mentioned at the beginning. It's an instruction to provide your CPD record. So the instruction actually reads, finally, show us that you actively undertake, record and reflect, 3 things there, undertake, record and reflect on your development by providing your CPD record. This should include at least 2 examples from within the last 2 years of development activities you've undertaken, along with your accompanying reflections on how those activities impacted you. So 2 examples of development activities from the last 2 years. 2 activities, at least 2. You can go more than 2. I wouldn't go too many. 3 is probably at least, well, 3 is plenty, but 2 is enough as well. So 2 examples at least from the last 2 years of development activities you have undertaken. When it comes to which activities you choose, you can think very widely there. They could be formal planned activities. You may have been on a course or program, online or face-to-face. It may have been something very formal. It may equally have been something quite informal. You might have read a book or listened to a program on the radio, just listened to a podcast. You may have had a talk with a mentor. Anything that's a development activity. It may be something as part of your work. So it could be that you've been seconded to a role, or that you undertook a work project, or you took on a developmental task, something that you took on because you knew it would have an aspect of development for you. It might also be something you did as a result of a shortfall in your skills and knowledge. There may have been a performance issue you needed to remedy, or it may just be something that you chose because you wanted to develop in that, or you wanted to find out more. The type of activity you choose doesn't really matter. What really matters is that you choose activities that are substantial, that will give you something to talk about in this part of the question, because as well as explaining the activity, importantly, you are asked to explain the impact, to discuss the impact of the activity on you. Development is only development if it results in some kind of change in you. So by impact, we mean change. What did it do? How did it impact you? What difference did it create in you? So think about that when you're choosing your 2 or more, if you like, activities. And in terms of your reflections on that impact, make sure, as we've said, that you've chosen examples that give you room to reflect in this way. And for each of those examples, think about how have you changed, how have you evolved as a person and as a people practice professional as a result of those developments. So did you gain a greater understanding of something, more knowledge? And if so, how has that impacted behaviour? Has that knowledge made you think differently and therefore do something differently or feel differently? How are you, or is your performance different because of that learning you've undertaken? You might also consider if the activity is worth doing. Was the time, the cost, the effort involved in relation to the impact it's had on you? The impact may have been negative, it may have affected you in a negative way, but that's still impact. And it's still something you can talk about and tell us about. It may well form a very good example for this. Did the activity make you aware of or generate other development needs? It might have brought to the fore something that you really want to find out about or build your skills in. And what conclusion have you drawn from your activity about what happens next, about what you need to do further? Is it about more application? Is it, as we've just mentioned, about more development? Is it some action you have to take? What's been the impact of those development activities? So think about that. Think about it carefully. It's important stuff, and it's important to be aware of and recognize your own development, recognize how you are evolving, how you are moving forwards, and taking some control of that. And by reflecting on that impact, that helps you take control. So again, an interesting question or instruction to complete. And as we've said, your response to Q5 should be captured within your CPD record, and that's up to you how you present that CPD record. It can be any type of formal, structured CPD record. Quite often people do it in tabular form, which is great, that's absolutely fine. Some people will use the My CPD Reflections tool from CIPD. By all means use that, that's absolutely fine. You can cut and paste pages, you can copy, just make that work for you. Perhaps agree, if you are using that, agree how you're going to submit that with your centre before you do it. Or if you use a different format, then that's fine as well. If your centre thinks it's acceptable, it's very unlikely that CIPD won't find it acceptable. So agree how you're going to submit your CPD record with your centre. And remember as well that that's not included in that 2,000 word count. So you can, let yourself go a little bit with those reflections. Go in depth, think about what did it really mean to you? Be honest, be real, be genuine, and reflect your development, as mentioned, in whatever format you agree with your centre. Well, that's task 1. So if you have completed questions 1 to 4, you have 4 responses amounting to approximately 2,000 words, and you have completed a CPD record in an appropriate format, then you have completed task 1. Just a reminder there, as it says, and as we've said many times, your CPD record is not included in that 2,000 words. So use your 2,000 words fully for those first 4 questions. Well, you've completed task 1. Let's just run through a little bit of guidance before we finalise things. Just a few things to think about before you submit your assignment. So check first of all that you have responded clearly to the questions. Learners occasionally waste an awful lot of words telling us about things that are irrelevant, that don't really answer the questions and which aren't going to get them any marks. So check your work, check that you've responded clearly to each question. Include any examples or references you think will be helpful. Although it's not essential at level 3 that you include references, it certainly enhances your response, and examples are great, and many of the questions actually ask for examples. So certainly where you're asked for an example or a reference, you must do so. But even where you're not asked, sometimes they can enhance the question or enhance the response. Make sure that you clearly link your responses to the questions. Make sure it's obvious to your assessor what you're answering where. A good way of doing that is to just write out the question above your response, as you can see in the example there, Q1. If that's a bit wordy and you just want to do something shorter, you can just condense the question. Just give your response a little heading like there, where the question has been redacted slightly. And remember, of course, to comply with those evidence and word count requirements. So in this case, the evidence requirement was just for 4 responses and a CPD record, and your word count requirements was 2,000 words plus or minus 10%. Obviously, that all differs with different assessment briefs, but they're the specifications for this brief. So having checked all that, your assignment should now be complete. But again, there's no harm in just going back, making sure again, have you added your name and student number? Have you proofread everything? Have you checked that you've got a clear layout, subheadings or question references? Have you checked your word count? And then most of all, submit it on time. There's no point doing a fantastic assignment, beautifully laid out, if you don't submit it on time. So start early, start as soon as you can. That gives you time to redo things and improve, and just make sure you complete everything and you submit on time. When all of that is done, you will have completed your assignment. Well done. You have also at this point reached the end of this webinar. Thank you for staying with us to the end, and we hope you have found the guidance helpful. It's worth saying that there are other recorded webinars for units within this foundation qualification, along with webinars for several other CIPD qualifications. Finally, we would just like to wish you all the best with your assignment. Thank you.